Iran said yes. Then it said no. Then it submitted a counterproposal that the President of the United States called, in all caps, totally unacceptable. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, according to Donald Trump himself, Iran offered to give up its entire stockpile of enriched uranium, then took it back before putting anything on paper. A 10-week war, a blocked waterway that carries 1/5 of the world's oil, a ceasefire described as being on massive life support, and a peace deal that appears to be collapsing in real time, not from the battlefield, but from a negotiating table. Here is exactly what happened and what it means for every person watching this. The war between the United States and Iran began when the U.S. and Israel launched strikes against Iran on February 28th. That was roughly 10 weeks ago. In response, Tehran imposed a near total blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow choke point through which, during peacetime, about 1/5 of global oil and natural gas exports pass. A temporary ceasefire took effect on April 8th. It was fragile from the start, and it is never fully held. Now, on Sunday, May 11th, Iran sent its formal counterproposal to Washington, delivered through Pakistan, which has been serving as a diplomatic go-between. Trump's response came on Truth Social. I have just read the response from Iran's so-called representatives. I don't like it. Totally unacceptable. Tehran, for its part, vowed it would never bow. This story is moving fast, and the next development could shift everything. If you want fact-based coverage without the noise, subscribe now, because this situation is not slowing down. Let's go back to Sunday and reconstruct exactly how this day unfolded. Iran transmitted its counterproposal through Pakistan, which has been acting as a mediator. Even before the full text reached the Oval Office, Trump posted on Truth Social, accusing Iran of stalling. He wrote that Iran has been playing games with the United States and the rest of the world for 47 years, and that they will be laughing no longer. 2 hours after that post, he released a second one, this time saying he had actually read it. The verdict? Totally unacceptable. So what was in Iran's counterproposal? Iranian state media reported that Tehran's response included a demand for recognition of its sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, as well as compensation. Crucially, Iranian state media reports on the proposal did not mention the country's nuclear program, which has been one of the key issues the U.S. has tried to address. That omission is not a detail. That is the entire argument. Washington has insisted on resolving differences over Iran's nuclear program before ending the war. Iran, by contrast, has demanded an end to fighting in the Strait of Hormuz before it will negotiate on the nuclear issue at all. These two positions are not just far apart, they are structurally incompatible. Each side is demanding the other move first. Trump told reporters Monday he has the best plan ever to end the war, describing it simply, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. He called Iran's latest offer a stupid proposal and said any agreement requires Iran to pledge to stop pursuing a nuclear program. Then came the most startling revelation of the day. Trump accused Iran of reneging on an agreement to allow the U.S. to remove its supply of enriched uranium. They did 2 days ago, he said from the Oval Office, but they changed their mind because they didn't put it in the paper. Iran had told the administration it would give up its enriched uranium, but that the U.S. would have to come and remove it. There are now different camps within the administration recommending alternating paths. Some officials in the Pentagon have argued for a more aggressive approach, including targeted strikes to further weaken Tehran's negotiating position. Others are still pushing to give diplomacy a fair chance. The ceasefire, meanwhile, is not holding cleanly. The U.S. military said Iran attacked 3 American warships transiting the Strait of Hormuz with missiles, drones, and small assault boats. The Pentagon said all threats were destroyed and that self-defense strikes against Iranian ports were launched in response. The U.S. has insisted those exchanges do not mean an end to the ceasefire. Trump's own words about the ceasefire's condition? On life support and unbelievably weak. Iran offered the U.S. its enriched uranium, then pulled it back before signing anything, which raises one question no one in Washington seems to be able to answer. Is Tehran negotiating or buying time? The Strait of Hormuz is a strip of water roughly 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. It sits between Iran and Oman. And under normal conditions, ships carrying a fifth of the world's oil and natural gas pass through it every single day. Right now, that flow is choked. Oil prices have surged since the war began in late February. Brent crude, the global benchmark, closed at about $100 per barrel on Friday, up from $73.21 a day before the war started. U.S. West Texas Intermediate futures advanced to $100.03 per barrel, while Brent crude rose to $105.76 per barrel on Monday. That is not a blip. That is a structural shift in the global cost of energy, and the consequences are radiating outward. Airfare costs, shipping rates, and utility bills are climbing, jeopardizing economic growth across multiple regions. According to the United Nations Development Program, about 8.8 million people are in danger of being pushed into poverty, and the conflict may cause $299 billion in economic losses to the Asia-Pacific region alone. Meanwhile, governments are running out of buffer. When the war started, governments scrambled to adapt to the closure of the strait, drawing down energy stockpiles, cutting power, prioritizing household gas over fertilizer production. But those emergency measures were based on the assumption the war would be short. That hasn't happened. With no clear end in sight, the fuel crisis is now rippling across economies in a second, more consequential wave. Do you think this situation escalates further, or is this the ceiling? Drop your view in the comments right now, because the range of opinions on this is genuinely wide. Back in Washington, the Energy Secretary was asked directly about relief. Chris Wright said he would not make predictions about when gas prices would drop, but that it is dependent on the Strait of Hormuz reopening. When we start to get free flow of traffic through the Straits of Hormuz, energy prices will come down, he said. Wright also said the administration has already tapped the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, revised EPA regulations on gasoline blends, and asked refiners to shorten maintenance periods to keep fuel pumping. The administration may also consider suspending the federal gas tax. And here is the buried contradiction in all of this. Wright told CNN last month that Americans might not see gas prices fall below $3 per gallon until 2027, even if the strait reopened earlier. Trump publicly said Wright was totally wrong. The president and his own energy secretary appear to be working from different assumptions about the economic timeline, which raises a quiet but serious question about whether anyone inside the administration has a realistic picture of how long this disruption can continue. One senior administration official said that once the strait fully reopens, a gusher of oil will hit markets and prices will fall quickly, and that it could take a month or two to reopen, but that they expect prices to drop significantly ahead of the midterm elections. The midterm elections. That is the political clock running underneath all of this. Here is what almost no one is talking about. Netanyahu told CBS that he wants to reduce U.S. military support for Israel from $3.8 billion a year to zero. I think it's time that we weaned ourselves from the remaining military support, he said. Think about what that means. The U.S. and Israel launched this war together. And now, while peace talks are collapsing and the ceasefire is described as on life support, Israel's prime minister is publicly signaling he wants to detach Israel from U.S. military dependency, while also saying the war on Iran is not over and that Tehran retains many capabilities it had at the start. Two allies, one war, and apparently two very different ideas about where this goes from here. There is a version of this story that gets told entirely in terms of oil prices, diplomatic cables, and military exchange rates. But behind those numbers are real people, hundreds of millions of them. Start in Asia. Asia's first defenses against energy shocks from the war are running short, and a more consequential second wave of impacts is beginning to hit. Governments across the region built their initial crisis responses around one assumption: this would end quickly. It hasn't. So the reserves they drew down are not coming back. The power rationing they started as a temporary measure is becoming something closer to permanent. The countries with the least resources to respond, the consumers who can least afford to pay, are the ones who feel everything first. In India, the response from the government is striking in its directness. Prime Minister Modi has urged Indian citizens to conserve fuel and avoid holding overseas weddings. That is not a metaphor. That is a government publicly asking its population to restructure their lives around a war being fought thousands of miles away. In the United States, the conversation is happening at the gas pump. With the busy summer travel season approaching, the Energy Secretary declined to predict when prices would drop, while the same administration debates suspending the federal gas tax and has already started pulling from emergency petroleum reserves. American families planning road trips this summer are doing those calculations right now without knowing the answer. And in the Strait itself, the actual physical choke point at the center of all of this, something happened on Sunday that deserves attention. A Qatari liquefied natural gas tanker crossed the Strait of Hormuz on Sunday for the first time since the war began. The passage was reportedly approved by Iran to build confidence with Qatar and Pakistan. One tanker, a symbolic gesture. The passage did little to ease broader market concerns. Oil prices kept climbing. That one ship crossing the strait did not open the strait. It illustrated how closed it still is and how significant even a single approved passage had become. Meanwhile, the diplomatic machinery is grinding. Britain and France will co-chair a meeting of more than 40 nations on Tuesday to discuss military plans for restoring trade flow through the Strait of Hormuz. Britain has already sent the HMS Dragon warship to the Middle East, describing it as strictly defensive to support mine clearance and protect vessels. France has deployed its carrier strike group to the Red Sea. Iran's deputy foreign minister warned both countries against deploying their warships in the strait. So you now have a situation where the U.S. ceasefire is, quote, on life support. Iran has rejected the pressure to negotiate on nuclear terms first. Britain and France are moving warships into position. Over 40 nations are convening to discuss a military mission, and oil prices are above $100 a barrel. All of that is happening simultaneously, right now. The 8.8 million people the UN says are at risk of being pushed into poverty are not abstractions. They are families in Pakistan, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, countries that were already walking a fiscal tightrope before this war started. A $30 spike in oil prices does not feel the same in every country. In some places, it means higher gas bills. In others, it means fertilizer becomes unaffordable, which means food prices spike, which means hunger. That is the downstream consequence of a waterway being closed. There are now two camps inside the U.S. government pulling in opposite directions. Pentagon officials are pushing for targeted strikes to further pressure Iran. Diplomats are arguing for more time at the table. Trump says he has a plan. He says it's simple. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. Iran says its conditions are firm, and that if Washington responds positively to its counterproposal, talks could move forward quickly. Those two statements cannot both be true at the same time. Trump has grown impatient with what he sees as division within the Iranian leadership, preventing them from making substantial concessions. If the Pentagon hawks win the internal argument, what does the next strike look like? If the diplomats hold on, how many more days can the ceasefire survive exchanges of fire in the strait? Step back, look at the architecture of this moment. You have a war that started February 28th, a ceasefire that technically began April 8th, but has never functioned as one. A mediator, Pakistan, carrying messages between two governments that are publicly describing each other's positions as unacceptable and garbage. A strait that controls a fifth of global oil still closed. And a diplomatic framework that is now being pulled in 4 different directions simultaneously. Washington, Tehran, Jerusalem, and a coalition of over 40 nations trying to build a maritime mission without triggering a wider escalation. One political analyst described Trump as having painted himself into a corner. He is unwilling to concede further to the Iranian government because that would contradict the narrative of U.S. strength he has been projecting throughout the war. Iran, meanwhile, has not backed down from the conditions it set before the campaign began. China is watching carefully. Beijing hosted Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi last week. Chinese top diplomat Wang Yi reaffirmed the strategic partnership between China and Iran while urging Tehran to pursue a diplomatic resolution. But China cannot be seen making concessions that undercut its relationship with Iran, and it cannot risk the reputational damage of a failed mediation effort. So China wants peace, but on terms that don't cost it anything politically with Tehran. The U.S. wants peace, but only after Iran commits on nuclear terms first. Iran wants peace, but only after the war stops and the blockade ends. These are not positions that converge naturally. They require someone to move. And right now, no one is moving. Iran's own officials said, nobody in Iran writes a plan to please Trump. If Trump is unhappy with it, that is actually better. That is not the language of a side looking for a compromise. That is the language of a side that believes domestic defiance is politically more valuable than a deal. And there's the military dimension that refuses to recede. Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi accused the U.S. of a reckless military adventure and said Iranians never bow to pressure. Iran has also formally accused the U.S. of violating the April 8th ceasefire agreement and the UN Charter. What happens in the next 72 hours could determine whether this situation stabilizes at a fragile, costly status quo or tips into a new phase. The 40-nation defense meeting on Tuesday is the immediate watch point. If that coalition formalizes a mission to escort ships through the strait, Iran has already warned it will respond. If it doesn't, if the meeting produces only statements, then the blockade continues, prices hold above $100, and the economic clock keeps running. The ceasefire is described as on massive life support, but even life support has a limit. This story is developing faster than almost any diplomatic standoff in recent memory. And the next 48 hours, the 40-nation meeting, Iran's next response, the internal battle in Washington between diplomats and hawks could reshape the trajectory entirely. What do you actually think happens next? Does this escalate into new strikes? Does a deal get forced through by economic pressure? Or does this grind on indefinitely while the world pays the price at the pump? Drop your honest read in the comments. The conversation there is genuinely worth having. And if you want every major update on this story as it breaks, subscribe now. We are not done here.